special feature.
Tickle. What's the front time, bitch?
What's going on? You are listening to The Prototype, only on ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm one of your hosts today. I am Mike, the Birdman Dodd, and I am not alone today. Well, physically, I'm alone because social distancing is a thing, and if you don't respect it, you're a fucking idiot. But we're actually going to talk about something rather fun and exciting today here on The Prototype, and this is what Alex, the producer, has called an evergreen topic, and I want to welcome my co-host, Alex, to the show.
Oh, hello. Should I explain what the topic is, or?
I'll kind of go into it. So today's topic, and this is through Alex's suggestion, and he actually reached out to a guest for us, which I never even thought about bringing on the show because I guess it just went over my head and it just kind of escaped me. But we're going to be talking about game collecting. That's right. Over the years, me and Alex have had a different approach to game collecting through our childhood experiences, through our adult years, and now as we enter the later parts of our mid-30s. Alex still in his early 30s. I'm approaching my 40s now. But we also wanted to bring on Dr. Gonzo from Nerd to the Third Power. You may recognize him from Nerd to the Third Power, which we syndicate weekly here on This Week in Geek, but also as Marcus from Fools Who Ride the Dreamstone. And it's going to be a fun time talking with him, as he's definitely one of the more prolific collectors that I know. If you follow his Facebook feed, you can see that he usually is out there doing some sort of a deal at any given time, finding various bits and pieces for his collection. So it's nice to have three different perspectives on this, because all three of us will have probably different stories to tell. So without any further ado, let's welcome Dr. Gonzo to the show.
What's up, dick lickers?
Yes!
That's payback for you starting every one of my shows that way, Mike.
I've never said dick lickers.
You don't understand. I am going to isolate that audio, and that will be the opening to many shows.
Good times had by all. So yes, guys, we are going to be talking about game collecting, and it's one of those things that I used to be really, really into, and then literally one day, probably about 6-7 years ago, I just kind of said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done with it. I literally went to a video game swap in Kitchener, actually, and I sold most of my game collection off for a couple of $1,000s and really haven't looked back since. Although my tale of game collecting doesn't start so tragically, it actually begins rather optimistically, and I guess I'll go first so you guys can kind of compile your thoughts. When I began game collecting, my parents got me one of the first NESs way back in 1985, 86. I know I was one of the first 100,000 to get it in Canada. The first ones that I had was Super Mario Brothers. I had The Legend of Zelda, Rad Racer, and Lode Runner were some of the first games that I had for the system. And as I was a very I wouldn't say I was an isolated child, but I really didn't have a lot of friends around me who enjoyed video games. I had my best friend growing up, Quincy, and I would play games with him, and I would trade games with him, and I would trade games with my speech therapist, because if you guys have noticed over the years, sometimes on Twig I stutter, not as often as much as I did when I was a kid, but I used to have quite a bad stutter. And I remember trading for Super Mario Brothers 2 at the time, and I think The Legend of Zelda 2, which is where the big love of that franchise came from. And there was a restaurant / bar and general store in a town named Wyerton. I remember we used to rent things from when I used to go up to visit my friend Quincy, and I remember renting the first Mega Man game, and that's when I kind of started to get the bug for it, because I used to bug my parents for new Nintendo games, and I'd get new Nintendo games on my birthday for good grades or graduation, so at least a couple a year. And then if I did anything extra, like I remember doing a paper route and delivering phone books, which was a very dangerous thing to surprisingly. My 60-year-old grandmother literally had me hang off the side of a pickup truck on an Indian reservation where I kind of have some roots, and I was throwing phone books off the side of the pickup truck going probably around 50, 60 miles per hour. So I could have fallen off at any given time. So that was fun. But the games I bought were DuckTales and Mega Man 3. And I think Snoopy at the Olympics was another game that I picked up. And that game I thought was tremendously fun. So that would have been probably around 1989, give or take. And by the time the Super Nintendo came around, I think 1990, 91, somewhere in there, I had 21 Nintendo games. And one of the best memories I have of this is I remember I was very young at the time. I must have been maybe 11 or 12. There was a pawn shop in Owen Sound, Ontario, and it was a very low rent in the basement of a store. So kind of scummy. You could tell people went here to get drug money. And this kid went in with his grandmother, and they were selling some of their Nintendo games, and the store just wasn't buying them. And I thought, wow, who wouldn't want to buy Nintendo games? Because at this time, the Super Nintendo was out, but it wasn't, a lot of people weren't spending a lot of money on it just yet. So getting rid of Nintendo games at that time was remarkably difficult. He had games that I wanted, but the store wouldn't take them. I had maybe $2-3 in my pocket in quarters. So I bought Mega Man 5 and 6 off of him for, I think, a combined total of maybe $1.50. And I remember I was so thrilled at the prospect of this that I remember hugging him. It was friggin' ridiculous.
Man, you must have been really hungry for new games.
Well, it was so weird because I was just overjoyed because I'd never seen Mega Man 5 and 6 in a store before. And in my area growing up, because I was in rural Ontario, there weren't a lot of specialty game stores. Like we
Did you
had
have a Toys R Us at all?
Oh God, no. The closest Toys R Us was in Barrie, and that was 2.5 hours away.
Okay, so you legitimately, you were stuck with, did you have
Big box.
I was gonna say you would have had Zellers, right?
Yeah, we had Zellers, Byway, and Walmart. Walmart came later, but Zellers was the primary avenue. Or this will date me as really old for our Canadian listeners. There was a store. No, older than that. Consumers Distributing.
Oh, consumer. That was basically you ordered from a catalog and then picked it up at a warehouse.
Yes, and it was ridiculous. And I remember getting my first RoboCop toys from there. But I remember specifically, it was always a big deal whenever I got a chance to go to a Consumers Distributing or a Toys R Us, because I could visit the one in Barrie the odd time we went, or when I went to visit my uncle in St. Catharines, or like Niagara Falls.
So now, just kind of a random question: did you have a lot of like movie rental places nearby you that also rented out games, like a Blockbuster or something like that?
Yes, actually,
because that's something that you hear a lot from collectors who they got started when they were growing up in like a really small town. Is they bought a lot of their games from rental places when the games stopped renting and the stores decided to sell them off at a reduced rate.
Yeah, in my small town, surprisingly, I grew up in a village of 500 people. We had 2 rental places, actually 3 rental places. We had the restaurant, bar, and gas station near my house. We had a little general store named Allen's that was down the bottom of the hill, and another place beside a biker shop that rented games and had a really awesome horror movie section too. But I remember buying some of their games as they went out of business and transitioned, which was a lot of fun. And then I made my first major decision as a game collector. I decided I want to collect Super Nintendo. I wanted the new hotness. So I sold 21 of my original Nintendo games at a bargain price. I sold them for $210, which at that time was a lot of money. I had enough money to buy a Super Nintendo, and I had enough money to buy like one game. So I got Mario World and the base control set for the Super Nintendo. My parents would buy me a Sega Genesis for Christmas, and the only game I had for the longest time was Sonic 2. But then I got Jurassic Park from Honeycomb Cereal, of all places. If you bought Honeycomb Cereal and you sent in like 5 UPC codes, they gave you a copy of Jurassic Park or something. So I'm thinking, okay, cheap game, not gonna say no. And I honestly loved it. So I collected that for a while. One of my best game collecting memories goes back to high school. I was starting to transition out of Super Nintendo, but this was one of the best trades I ever made, because I used to trade with some of my next door neighbors, and the next door kid, Timmy, was a big hockey player. And for some reason, I even to this day, it baffles my mind that he got this game. He got Final Fantasy III. And I'm thinking, okay. And I didn't know anything about it. But he's like, hey, Mike, do you want to trade? You have NHL Stanley Cup, which was the Super Nintendo's big showcase of Mode 7. The game sucked. But he's like, hey, I'll trade you 4 keeps for your NHL Stanley Cup, because it was officially licensed by the NHLPA for Final Fantasy III. Yeah, okay, sure. I kind of hate this game anyway. One of the greatest trades I ever made.
Yeah, you robbed him.
Oh my God, did I ever. I also remember picking up Chrono Trigger from a random store in the box for $20.
I can beat that story. You want to hear the one that got away from me? That this one really pisses me off. Okay, so Mike, have you ever talked to Tom, Tech Guy Tom? He used to do the editing for Nerd to the Third Power way back. I think you might be mutual friends with him on Facebook, but you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he messages me over Facebook last year and says, "Hey, look what I found at a Goodwill," and sends me a photo of this Game Boy cartridge of Spud's Adventure. And he was like, "I found this at a Goodwill for 50 cents," and I'm looking at this. I'm like, "Okay, what the hell am I looking at?" And he's like, "This is one of the top 5 rarest Game Boy games ever made." And I was like, okay, how rare are we talking? I'm thinking like, maybe $100, $200. No, this thing's worth about like $1,000. And he's got a lead on a box and a manual to go with it. So he's going to assemble a complete in-box package. Long story short, he wound up selling it for like $1,800. Here's the part that pisses me off. A week before he'd messaged me, I'd been in that exact Goodwill and I'd seen that exact game, and I passed it up because I thought it was just junk. So I could have had an $1,800 game in my collection if I'd been paying attention.
Oh, wow. That's pretty nuts.
Well, when we get to my backstory, I have Chrono Trigger story. I think we all sort of do, but Mike, like consumers distributing, I just wanted to get back to that.
You say that like it's a first date story. Oh, everyone's got a Chrono Trigger story.
But Mike, with consumers distributing, like for our American listeners that don't know, they basically came out with like a Sears catalog every few months, and you would pick a number in there, and you'd go and pick up stuff. I don't remember them having a ton of gaming stuff, but I'm a bit younger, so I would have been using consumers distributing in the mid '90s. So, did they have a pretty big selection back in the day?
Yeah, their toy selection was second to none, but they had an amazing selection of NES games, Super Nintendo, Sega Master System, Game Boy. I think I got my first Game Boy from Consumers Distributing too, actually.
Well, like they were basically like they were Amazon before Amazon.
They were the primordial ooze to which Amazon can attribute some of its DNA from. Yeah. One of the other great memories I have of game collecting, and this was a turning point for me. I had to make money if I wanted to buy the N64. And this is a system I did not put a lot of money in. This is kind of marks the decline of gaming for me for a while, because I remember I sold my Super Nintendo I sold Chrono Trigger, I sold Final Fantasy 3, and I think I had at most maybe 30 games for my Super Nintendo. And I remember selling those to get money for an N64. So the only games I had for the N64 for the longest time was Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, still one of my favorite games for that console. Super Mario 64, Killer Instinct Gold. I want to say I had Mortal Kombat Trilogy, and maybe a few others. I never had a very big library for that system. I somehow remember stealing, or through a Blockbuster error, I ended up with one of the really rare Castlevania games from Blockbuster. And I was like, okay. I paid a late fee and they let me keep the game. And they just never bothered me about it again. So I was like, all right, well, free game. Neat. But one of my best memories about game collecting, and this is when Nintendo was starting to put out the different colored consoles, the different colored controllers, and I was on a mission. I was on a hunt. The new amazingness for the N64 is the fact that it could have 4 multiplayer people playing it, and GoldenEye had come out, though the movie had come out 2 years prior. And I remember playing this with my girlfriend at the time, Michelle, a shit ton. Now, she sucked at that game, but we would rent it from Blockbuster or Gamma Video, and we would just play it for hours and hours. It was just high school love amazingness for like months at a time. And I remember saying to her, I really want a copy of GoldenEye for my birthday / us dating. Now, she couldn't get me a copy of GoldenEye, but she did get me my first N64 controller. And I held on to that thing even after we broke up and even after I got rid of my N64 for years. And I really didn't think about game collecting too much afterwards, that because I didn't want to get a PlayStation 1 because the PlayStation was so expensive. I can't remember the circumstances, but somehow I ended up with a PlayStation 1 that had a mod chip installed, and I think I got it for free. So I got to play Final Fantasy 7, I got to play Parasite Eve, Resident Evil 1, but I decided to focus on PC gaming for a while because I just couldn't afford the PlayStation. I remember when Bleem came out on the computer and I could play Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil Director's Cut, and I sort of abandoned collecting games for a really, really long time. Then I got my PlayStation 2 through a very weird set of circumstances. A friend of mine was dating this girl, and I couldn't fucking stand her. She was just a terrible person for a multitude of reasons. And he's like, Dodd, my girlfriend really needs a place to stay. She can't stay at my house. And I'm thinking, why? And he told me all the reasons why. I'm thinking, all right, well, first off, your dad's an asshole. But okay, because at this point I was living on my own. I just broken up with my first serious girlfriend. I had a place of my own. I was pretty secure in where I was right now. So through a weird set of circumstances, he gives me his PlayStation 2 to let his girlfriend stay with me for like a few weeks. And I started playing PlayStation 2 games. So the first 2 games I ever played for that console were Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and Metal Gear Solid 2 Subsistence. Or no, it was just the first Metal Gear Solid 2. But for some reason, this PlayStation 2 I used so much that after a year, the only game it would ever play would be Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. I don't know why. It would refuse to play any other discs except for Tony Hawk. So that was weird. But then that kind of got me back into playing because I bought another PlayStation 2 when the Slim came out, and I bought Guitar Hero, the first Guitar Hero. I saw it on G4 Tech TV being demoed. I had my own credit card for the first time, and I decided, hey, I've got money now. I'm not poor. And I started buying games again. And I bought Guitar Hero. And I remember just sitting in my living room with all my friends playing that entire set list over and over and over again. And I'd go back to that same scummy pawn shop, in Sound, and I'd look for cheap games. I remember getting a Nintendo, a Super Nintendo. People were gifting me their old systems from my friend group because they just didn't want them anymore. They were just collecting dust. So I remember saying to that same friend about his girlfriend, he's like, do you have any old games lying? He's like, yeah, actually I got a Nintendo and like 30 games. You want it? Yeah. How much you want for it? He's like, fuck, just get it out of my house. And I took it and I had all these Nintendo games. And then when I went off to college and I had my really bad breakup, I had a pretty sizable GameCube collection. And I had Eternal Darkness, I had Resident Evil 4, I had all the Resident Evils for it, and like a bunch of other games. Those all got stolen from me during the breakup, and I had to restart my game collection again with just PlayStation 2. Then when I started Twig back in 2007, I started sending out media releases to companies like Nintendo, Microsoft, Activision, EA, all these big companies I could think of. And back then, podcasting was a pretty small thing. So me and my Twig team, which at the time was like 3 or 4 of us, and as it grew over the years, we started getting more and more contacts. So all these game companies just started sending us shit. And we started building up a game collection that way, and nobody ever objected to it. I mean, occasionally one of the other Twig members would ask, hey, can I have the game? I'm like, yeah, sure. As long as you do the review for it, it's yours. But we also had a wonderful thing. There was a store called Entertainment Overload in Welland, which is where I went to college at Niagara. And this store was the best retro gaming store. The prices weren't terrible. The selection was amazing. And I remember collecting for the original Xbox. I remember getting Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Xbox, which had a fairly low print run. I think I picked it up for maybe $40, and I know it goes for significantly more now. And I just remember collecting so many games that way. And I collected a lot back then. I remember just buying so many games because we have this thing in where I'm from in Ontario called OSAP, which is the Ontario Student Assistance Plan. Is that right, Alex, or assistance program or something like that?
Program. It's not interest free, but it's student loan where they calculate it over a certain amount of time.
Yeah. So basically, part of my college was paid for because I'm Native, and that's how it typically works. Whatever, it's a whole thing. But I got to go to college for free, so I was given a stipend from my band, and I was also given OSAP later on when I went to grad school. So I was able to meet all my bills, all my expectations, and have money left over to go game collecting. So I started collecting for weirder consoles. I collected Game Boy, I collected GameCube, I collected Xbox, PS3. I remember my first PS3 I got by making a trivia website. And I had the Metal Gear Solid 4 Collector's Edition. And I remember working my ass off. The guy whose website I worked on, he paid me $1 a trivia question for this website. And he's like, and I asked him, is there any limit to which I can write? He's like, no. I'm like, what do you want for this? I want a PlayStation 3 because at that time they were still like $600. So I had to write 600 trivia questions, and I did that over the course of like 2.5 days. So I did that. I did wedding photography, and I got my first Nintendo Wii. And at that time, they were remarkably hard to come by, even 2 years after launch. When I got mine in 2008, they were just such a pain in the ass to get. And then things kind of took a turn. I got Blair, and I was still kind of game collecting, but we moved to Shelburne, which is the small town Ontario. My game collecting kind of slowed down. I was only hunting on Facebook, doing garage sales, maybe EB Games the odd time, but I was mostly only going for big collector's editions. I would go for the Halo 3 cat helmet. I remember getting like many statues, like the Max Payne edition with the really cool statue, or the Assassin's Creed games. So I wasn't collecting whatever anymore. I was collecting more curated, more high-end collectible stuff. But then the honeymoon kind of ended around 2013, 2014. I got hit with several large bills. Blair got a speeding ticket, and it was a significant blow, and I had to sell the arcade cabinet that she got me for our engagement back in 2009 or 10. I think it was 10. And that hurt, but I'm kind of like, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm starting to run out of space. So I sold the cocktail cabinet that I got for her engagement to us, and we sold that and paid off some bills and yet another speeding ticket. My wife has a lead foot. So I went to this game swap that my friend organized. I didn't know we'd be friends until much later, but I remember going to this game swap and blowing out most of my game collection for bottom prices. I remember the swap's about to end. There was maybe like an hour and a half left. So I stood on a chair. I'm like, all right, guys, for the next 20 minutes, everything at my table, 50% off. You better believe the bones were picked clean. And I walked away with about $3,000 or more. I can't remember which. But I kind of, and this is a time when the game industry was kind of shifting. A lot of companies weren't sending physical games anymore. You would get a lot of download codes because this is when the Xbox One and the PS4 were in their own. I mean, there were some death throws from the Xbox 360 and the PS3, but not many. And the Wii U was still a fairly new console at the time, but most of the time you got digital download codes, and well, that's tied to your system. That's tied to your digital IDs forever. So I kind of started looking at it that, you know what, I'm starting to run out of room. And then I just kept running in the bills where I kept having to sell stuff. And it really came to a head when I had my amputation back in 2017. I needed to make money in 2018 to buy my first manual wheelchair. And I started selling off all my collector's editions. And then a very candid conversation between Alex and I was like, Mike, do you really need all this shit? And he's like, yeah, it's cool, but it just sits there on a shelf. The last major collector's edition that I bought, and you're both going to laugh at this one, was Fallout 76 Power Armor Edition.
I gave you the stare of death when you said you had to have it. This is before the controversy.
Yeah.
You realize that this is going to be a disaster, and you're like, nope, it's not going to be a disaster. And then it was a disaster.
Oh, so Stadia's not the first time he's told somebody they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, good to know. Good to know.
I follow Alex's lead on Stadia.
So, it's not. It wasn't.
Mike knows what I'm talking about. But sorry, continue.
Ready for launch. It's ready now. And they just happened to try to get it out way too early.
So over time, I started selling things off, and I don't regret buying the Power Armor Edition because I really love the helmet. I actually got the replacement canvas bag from the nylon one that they include. I still got the box, so if I ever need to sell it, I know it'll sell to a Fallout collector at some point, should that situation ever arise. Now, I do buy a lot of digital collector's editions because I love the extra bonuses they get you, like extra weapons, armor, XP boosts, because I play a lot of multiplayer games for that. And then I became very jaded with the collector scene, and then I'll throw this to the kind of you guys. When the last game I bought was, weirdly enough, kind of a double-edged thing. So I bought the collector's edition of Persona 5 Royal, and then Sega gives me a review copy. Now you might be thinking, that's great and wonderful news, right? I should just be able to refund that money. You would think that, but Sony, you can't get a hold of anybody in support, so I can't ask them to refund a game despite the fact the game was already activated.
COVID related, because traditionally you could call them and have them cancel it, but
yeah,
you literally got your code like 2 weeks after the shutdown orders.
Yeah, basically. So I was like, fuck. So yeah, I mean, game collecting for me, I mean, I don't mind collecting digital because I'll always, and I say that in quotations, it's always there. And I only collect digital now because from a disability standpoint, it's not like I can quite literally and figuratively walk over to the console, eject the game, and pop it in.
Your actual case is that you rely on other people to move your console stuff for you if it's not within specific reach.
Yeah, I mean, the last big collecting bug I had, I guess outside of Fallout 76, is I collected amiibos and I had everything for a long time. I think I stopped about 4 years ago and I had every single one except Shulk. And then I sold those for like $500-$600 and I bought them all at retail. So I got lucky on a few of them. I had alerts set up on Twitter on my phone. Like when Best Buy had Meta Knight go up, I had that right away. And stuff like that. Shulk is the only one I missed out on because he was an EB Games exclusive. And yeah, so I'm sure I'll have more to add to this because there are some oddities that I've sold off over the years, including press kits. But let's throw things to whoever wants to go next.
Maybe me, because we know, as far as collection wise, somebody in this group has a lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah.
So my history with collecting is I'm a sizable chunk younger than you, Mike. So I was born in '87. So our first game system was when I was 5. For my birthday, we got a Nintendo, which to me, at 5, you have no concept of what's new and what's not. Like 1992, that was, just past the midlife of its game cycle. Like it was still going to have games for a couple more years, but to me, that was new. Then being told it was a family system, even though it came out and I got it on my birthday, which still doesn't make sense to me. I think it was a way to make it so that I couldn't hog it. And I played that here and there. Our first 2 games were Mario Brothers, obviously, and Dragon Warrior. So I was trying to figure out how to read and then trying to play Dragon Warrior, which was frustrating because the English translation of that was put into Old English. It's all like, thou hast, and I'm like, oh God. Now that I think about it, a 5-year-old trying to play that game was interesting. Our next system was an Atari 2600 that we got at a garage sale for $5 with like 30 games that we brought to our cottage because our cottage or my grandparents' cottage, which had an old black and white TV that would hook up to it. Reason we got it was the Nintendo, which we didn't want to always have to ship around everywhere. Use the it had the RCA jacks on the side, and then it had the RF. But the old TV that was at the cottage was literally the old ones that had just the UHF prongs. And, we didn't want to buy an adapter or anything, but that Atari just plugged in and worked. Now, as far as later on, I didn't really collect much because we didn't have a ton of money. We sort of went from system to system. A few years would go by when a system would come out, then we would sell everything we owned and get the new system. Collect a bit more for it, and then sell everything we owned and get the new system. Then, as my brother, who was 6 years younger than me, got to be of gaming age, 7, 8, 9, we each would have our own system, so we wouldn't fight over it. So he generally got the Nintendo-based systems. I would get the PlayStation-style ones, and we would sometimes get individual games for each other's systems and have to swap back and forth. And I, because of maybe Dragon Warrior, got enamored with RPGs because, I had friends and we would play games together, but I always liked to be there and like play my stories. It was like my soap operas. So as far as collecting interesting, weird stories and weird things happening, I got Chrono Trigger by renting it at a Rogers Video, which was like Canada's version of Blockbuster, if Blockbuster was owned by the largest cable company in the country. Rented it about 2 or 3 times. Same with Super Mario RPG. And pretty much every time I would rent it over the course of 6 months, my save file would still be there because not too many people were renting them anymore in like 97 or 98. So interestingly enough, I ended up getting Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger for $9.95 each from the store when they were selling off their Super Nintendo games. Owned them, ended up selling them at like game stores and garage sales. 5 or 6 years later, getting both games again randomly through swap meets and finding out they were my copies.
Wow.
My save files were still on both. Going through selling all that stuff again, a couple of years later when I needed cash. So we're in the early to mid 2000s, and around 2010, purchasing one from the States. I think it was in Texas, and one was from like BC. They show up in the mail, and they're my copies again. And I kid you not, because I had marked my name on them. So they had traveled all across the entire I guess, continent before coming right back to me. So I guess it was a sign. And then I ended up selling them, and I don't know what happened to them. Somebody probably has them now. As far as
give it a year, you'll get them back.
yeah, as far as any maybe true, as far as any other funny ones, at the Zellers that we had in town, I went there and they had a bargain bin of you see like the $9.99, $10.99, $12 whatever game bins, and I ended up picking up because I'm like I have maybe enough money for 2 games, so I picked up Suikoden 1 for $10 when they had a bin of 30 of them, selling them off. And the other one I picked up was Secret of Evermore. and it was between Secret of Evermore and, of all things, Earthbound. They had about 3 or 4 copies of that, in the big box. And I was like, I don't know what that is. That looks stupid. And then I was like, ooh, this one's made by the Final Fantasy people. And I made the worst choice ever. Because right now, I'm pretty sure Secret of Evermore is still $10. And I don't think Earthbound is $10 anymore. Complete in the box, brand new.
You know what? That makes me think of something. There in the Zellers in my old hometown, the one that was going out of business, and we only had one left in Owen Sound, there was a brand new sealed copy of Earthbound next to a copy of Super Tennis for the Super Nintendo, and both were still there when the store closed at $10 clearance.
That makes me think of the Walmart in town here in Kitchener. When it opened, it was the first converted Woolco. It was the first Walmart in Canada. So it's still, and I think, Mike, you've been there. Like, it looks old. The building was built in the 70s and they haven't changed anything with it. But they had, up until 2 years ago, a copy of Super Tennis behind the shelf, at the bottom of the Nintendo shelf. And they didn't get rid of it because it wasn't in the system. I offered them $1. And they're like, well, we can't find where it is in the system. It's not in your system because it has a Woolco sticker on it. This is from before your store existed, and it's still in here. and it still had the price tag. Do you remember how much those things were, Mike, in the 90s?
Yep.
$79.99. And to give you an idea, $79.99 is the regular price now for games in Canada. So it's our equivalent of the $59. That's $79.99 in the early 90s. You convert that to now, that's $110. And that's what they wanted for a sports title. So that's an interesting, funny thing there. And then there was also a store that I would get my games from in town called Discount Games. They were a rental store, one of the earliest in the region. They had been open since the mid 80s, renting games, and they would rent out PC games on CD and floppy disks. So I was one of the first families to have a CD burner. So I built up
the colors.
Yeah. So I built up a sizable collection of games. It's I would literally pick out games. I'm like, which games have the most discs? Because that would be worth the most to copy for me. So I had a lot of copies of terrible games like Phantasmagoria. But that's how I got to play the Baldur's Gate games originally, was through that. So I was like, cool. As far as collecting goes, once I started getting my own money to collect different systems. My goal was to own every system possible, not every game possible, try to get every system. I had 20 or 25 different game systems, TurboGrafx, 3DO, everything, as much as I could possibly get my hands on. At one point, the collection started getting bigger and bigger, and then I needed money, as some people do when I ended up getting out of work, and I'm like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And then I was like, this isn't working great. And around that time, this would have been about 2008, 2009, maybe. That's when I started listening to Twig. And Mike, when did you start your review a day? Was it 2009, 2010?
Yeah, it would have been about 2000, very early 2010. Because I'd moved from Hamilton, so I was in Shelburne when it started.
And you had to listen. You're like, hey, if anybody has any donations, I've been looking for stuff. And that's actually when I met you. You came by to pick up games, and I gave you 2 giant totes with probably 250 games, just as donations. Everything from Genesis to a lot of Genesis titles. I think my entire Genesis collection went to you. It was probably $3,000 or $4,000 worth of stuff or more. And I basically filled the bins with stuff for you to review. And you made a video of it at one point when you got the collection. You're like, hey, you showed off everything you got. That video is long gone. I don't even think your YouTube channel has, it up anymore.
No, I don't know what happened to it. Like a lot of the early stuff that I did has just been lost
It's
to time, and even reviewaday.ca is now defunct. So
pretty much, and it's fun. I think the website still turns on if you go to the website address, but it doesn't
Nope.
have
Nope.
It's finally done.
It expired this month, and I'm thinking, well,
Okay,
that's
that's
enough
what
of
it was.
that.
But yeah, eventually it could rise up again. You never know. But so when I hear you talk about, you're like, I brought my collection to that swap meet and sold everything. It's like half that stuff is probably stuff I gave you. So because it was like a massive collection of older stuff. And I kept most of the more rare things and eventually sold them to a local game store here when I needed cash. As far as prized sort of possessions in those collections, I had a sizable RPG collection. I wasn't somebody who needed to have complete in box. My collection was mostly to play. I wanted to be able to just pick up and go. I didn't care the condition if it had scuffs on it, as long as it was playable. I didn't care about resale value or even display value. Emulation was still fairly new. I had played some emulated translated games like the original Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on the Nintendo back when I was like, was it grade 5, grade 6, 1998, something like that. When they were first translated, I got a hold of a copy, had to download them onto individual floppies, and then run it on Nesticle on my DOS computer, and I was able to play them that way. Now, as far as ones that I really, really had to hold on to, I had picked up a game. I don't know if either of you've heard of it, called Cosmic Fantasy 2. It is one of the rarest, hardest to find, unknown titles on the TurboGrafx CD. I never had an ability to play it because trying to find a CD unit that still worked was like next to impossible, and I'm not spending $500 on a system. But on eBay, somebody at an old store had left a entire like crate, I guess, in their basement of like all copies of it sealed. So I bought 2 copies for like $30. And it turns out I was able to sell them for like, I think, $200 a piece. But it was the first RPG released by Working Designs. Yeah, they were famous for the Lunar games and what else? Lunar, the Arc the Lad series.
Pour one out for Working Designs.
Pardon me, sorry?
I said pour one out for Working Designs.
Yeah, exactly. And now they're Gaijin Works, and they've done like 2 releases, and then they just haven't said anything in like 3 years. But they were basically pioneers of English translated games and voice acting. So this is like, I think the game was like 1991, and it predates their work for any of the Sega titles, and it had full voice acting, which is terrible. But it was one of those things where it's like, I liked the weird and obscure. Not necessarily that they were super expensive, but I like to have things that nobody else had seen or had experienced. Now, with the age of the internet, it's different. But I had that. My Super Nintendo collection, I had almost a complete US Canada RPG collection on the system. Everything from Secret of the Stars to Robotrek to, and that's Robotrek, not Robotech, to like Paladin's Quest and everything like that. And then I was trying to collect bits and pieces here and there. At one point, I had pretty much everything on every system prior to the PlayStation 2 that was an RPG, except for Earthbound and what's it called? Panzer Dragoon Saga, because I wasn't going to spend $400 for loose discs. And then the only other thing I can think of that was really funny as far as collecting stories is we would sometimes go, to garage sales and that, and you could get games, like Mike said, for like 50 cents or $1, and you'd end up with like a Mega Man. I think I got Mega Man X3 for $3 or $4. What else did I get? I'm pretty sure at one point, I got an Atari Lynx, the Lynx 2, like the remodel of it, for I think $5 at the garage sale because it was missing the battery cover, and I was like, I don't care. And like I was like, do you have any other games? And they're like, yeah, there's a box of games for like $2, and I ended up with like 10 games for that system, which is pretty cool. It's a thing where I didn't even know the system existed, because unless you were digging on the internet back in the day, you really didn't know what was out there unless you had seen an advertisement for it. Like, I didn't know the TurboGrafx existed until I was about 17, because like you had heard of Bonk. I had heard, like, I didn't know, like, I thought maybe, is that a weird Japanese system that never came here? I didn't realize that it had a domestic release. Like, I thought that the 80s I didn't even know the Master System existed. I was like, there's, the Nintendo, the the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and I was like, I knew the 3DO existed, and I thought that was like the first time a new company had tried to make anything. I knew the Jaguar existed, but I never, that was the one system I never ended up getting, because every time I tried to buy one of those systems, we'd test it by plugging it into the wall, and it would set on fire because there was a problem with it. Now, as far as anything else, the last story I can think of as far as weird stories is sometimes you could go to like liquidators and they would have, they'd have a crate of whatever games. Well, do you remember how hard it was sometimes to play games on the original Nintendo without blowing on the cartridges or cleaning it, or if there's finicky pins? Sometimes the solution to fix that was to use a Game Genie, and for whatever reason it would fit better for a while at least and work. Well, this one liquidation store here had a bin of brand new Game Genies. Like, this is in like 1996, 95, 96, maybe 97. And when I say a bin, I mean a bin, and they were $1 a piece. So we went and picked up, I think, 20 of them, and we would use them until the game stopped working with it, because whatever was wrong with the pins. Then we would take it and go to a pawn shop and sell it for about $10 to $20 per unit and use it to buy games. And that worked with us for about a couple of years. And then as far as collecting goes, like I said, I collected a whole bunch of stuff, gave a lot to Mike, kept a smaller sizable collection for a couple more years. And then when I had to move and stuff, I was like, it's too much stuff for me to collect and carry around. I don't need it. So my goal was like, just keep the systems. And then all these micro consoles started coming out, and I was like, well, I'm not afraid of emulation. I'm not so attached to the collecting aspect of it anymore. So now my only collection is, I got digital stuff for review now that I joined Twig. And I would say, in the last 2 years since I joined, I've sent out and communicated with probably 300 companies I've had correspondence with, and that's how we built up a repertoire. That's why we're doing anywhere from 5 to 20 game reviews a month now, which can be crazy around Christmas time, eh, Mike?
Oh, God.
Where it's like, oh, no. But the thing is, you cast a wide net and see what happens. So when it comes to digital, I'm more about the experience. I like to play it. Do I like physical? Yeah, cool, because it has some resale value. But if I'm playing it for the experience, I don't mind how I'm playing it. So I don't, especially if I'm not spending money on it doesn't matter to me. But I do buy those micro consoles, as I might be the only person that actually likes them. Like, I've got the Commodore 64 Mini, I've got the PlayStation, the Genesis, all that sort of stuff, because I like the ability to just plug them in. And if I do want to mod them and put on copies of my old games, I can do that. I just like having the aesthetic of the mini console. So as far as collecting goes, that's pretty much it for me now. I had, some related memorabilia like Funkos and different things, and I don't really care about that, but I do like having the mini consoles. And that's pretty much, we're up to date. Like, I'm at a point now where it's like, to me, there are things collecting dust, and if I have to move somewhere, I don't want to have to collect and move them around. And if they're digital, and let's say that the code goes away, there's always a way to find to play them. I'll say that. If the way I look at it is, I paid for the license for the game. I paid for the game to use, and if you've disabled my ability to play the game I paid for, I'll find a way to play it.
Now it is your time, Dr. Gonzo.
All right. Well, go ahead and get yourselves nice and settled in, children, because this is going to be a long story here. So, as Mike knows and Alex is learning, gaming has pretty much been the biggest thing in my life since I was a small child. The first video game system that I was ever exposed to was when I was 4 years old. My cousin Angela was living with us while she was taking her first year or so of college, and she had a Nintendo Entertainment System and an NES and a television. And my father, who's a teacher himself, believed that a television and video game system didn't belong in a student's room. But so that question became where to put it. So I was like, well, okay, he saw video games as a toy, so where do you put toys? You put them in the child's room, my room. So I remember she had Super Mario Brothers. She had Mario Brothers 1 and 3. She had Duck Hunt. And then I remember she had The Legend of Zelda, but I wasn't too big into that at 4 years old. It was a little outside of my skill base. First video game system I had that was really mine was when I was 6 years old. My father took me to the Navy Exchange in Annapolis and bought me my first Game Boy, the original gray brick Game Boy. And I remember very clearly he bought me a copy of Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. He bought my sister a Barbie game for her to play on it. And then this is the one that always makes me laugh. He bought a copy of Chess Master for him to play on the Game Boy, and then subsequently never touched it again. So that de facto became mine. And my Game Boy collection remained pretty small until very recently. I think I only got, I remember I got Metroid 2. I got Pokemon when that came out, Red and Blue. Once I discovered Zelda, I loved the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. I have both the original version of that and the DX version that came out on the Game Boy Color. But in Metroid 2, I didn't get a whole lot of Game Boy games though until very recently when I started getting into collecting real big. And then after that, I got a Super Nintendo from my mother for getting good grades on my report card one year, and I want to say like a 3rd grade. And that was the big hotness for me for a long time. That's also the only console that I've ever gotten rid of. And in my defense, the only reason I did was because the console actually died. So it wasn't, I wasn't actually able to play it. I kept all the games, but I wound up throwing out the console. And then in 97, with my birthday money, I got myself an N64 and I bought Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And then that became my next obsession was my N64. I remember I had Perfect Dark, I had Majora's Mask, I had Pokemon Stadium. Let's see, Resident Evil 2. I got the N64 port of that, and I had to keep that hidden from my mother for a while because she absolutely did not want me playing those games. Mario 64, Mario Kart. And then in high school, again, had to buy it with my own money, and I'm a Nintendo fanboy, so I'm going to always buy a Nintendo console first. So I wound up getting the GameCube. Metroid Prime was the first game I got for that. I absolutely fell in love with that game because Metroid is like one of my favorite game franchises ever. Of course, Smash Melee. If you didn't have Melee, you didn't have a GameCube. Again, Mario Kart. God, it's like the problem I have is my collection is so huge, right? I'm sitting right now at a little under 870 games spread out over 29 systems. That is really hard.
Jesus Christ.
It's really hard. It's really hard for me to keep track now of what I had when I was young versus what I bought subsequently.
I was gonna say I feel for you. Like I forgot to mention, at the height of my game collecting before I gave stuff to Mike, I had 1,100 games.
I think I was around maybe 600-700.
I gave you 400. I know that.
In that case, no, maybe I was around 9, maybe at the height.
Because remember, mine were all loose. So like Genesis carts are loose, are not very big.
No, they really
so I believe me, Dr. Gonzo. I feel for you. I know how sizable that can be.
It's gotten to the point where I actually have to keep a database of my collection, which I'll get to that later. How I manage that. So GameCube, and then because of the last 2 years of high school, I went to a boarding school down in Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, in Newmarket, Virginia, which is the middle of nowhere. I didn't really have a whole lot of opportunity to get new console games, so I wound up turning to emulation. I discovered a site that had a bunch of old Nintendo and Sega, basically retro emulation sites, and I wound up becoming basically the campus game dealer. It's like, hey, you want some video games? I got Final Fantasy here. Never released in the States. Final Fantasy V never came out. Fan translated. So like,
nice.
There was a stretch of time for like maybe 6 months my junior year where people who would not talk to me in any other circumstance were knocking on my dorm rooms like, hey, I hear you got Nintendo games that you're handing out for people to play. Can you hook me up? It's like, yeah, sure, here you go. So I finally wound up having to start charging for the CDs because this was again back in the early days of CD burning. So those discs were expensive. So I wound up having to I wound up making a pretty penny charging for the CDs to burn all the games onto.
I honestly, I think we're almost kindred spirits. I have a quick little tiny story to supplement yours. I don't know what year you were talking about doing that, but when I was
2002 and 2003. I graduated in 2004.
Okay, so 2005, I'm in grade 12, and uh, I think the statute of limitations is up, but I was pretty good with computers. I hung around with. I was the guy that got along with everybody, the jocks, the computer geeks, everybody. But I was a nerd at heart. I happened to find with my friends an exploit that would allow us to save things permanently on the school server. Because generally, you know, those Windows PCs, they would lock them down with like deep freeze, I think was the software. Every time you rebooted, it would flash your image, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I found a way to make a permanent database of 20,000 ROMs on the school board's server.
Lord.
And
were there even that many games released at that time?
Yeah, it was everything from DOS, every system in existence up into the CD-based consoles was absolutely everything, every language. Like, it was basically full ROM sets. Developed a quick little website that would run the emulators through Java when Java was still new, and paid for the domain. And our school board was hosting thousands of ROMs for anybody that wanted to use them. Initially for our people at school, but then I realized now there's a possibility that a lot of people used it worldwide. And yeah, it's definitely gone. Like, there's no way it's still there. But yeah, that was my workaround, because I got tired of burning CDs for friends. was to basically use the school board government website for piracy. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We're kindred spirits, my friend.
Okay, well, virtual fist pound. But as far as hardcore collecting, I didn't really get into that until I want to say about 2006 or so, in my first couple of years of college, and that was really when retro collecting in general was starting to really find its footing. Like, you had stores like Funko Land that sold like the old Nintendo and Sega games when the CD stuff came out, but a lot of those wound up disappearing when GameStop wound up blowing through, like, you know, fucking Force Barbarossa. But obscure history joke, maybe like 3 people will get that reference. But in 2000, actually no, it was not 2006. Excuse me, it was about 2008, and this is when I got picked up for the site that shall not be named. It was run by a certain bald pig fucker, and I met Pat Breeden, known as Cold Guy, there, and he had this like database of stores that sold retro games that he sent me, and we looked. Me and a friend of mine, we looked and found one that was within driving distance of us, called Play and Trade in Olney, Maryland, that we found and we absolutely fell in love with, and we just went ham at this place every time we went there. We went at least once or twice a month, and we never spent less than $150 each. We were like their favorite customers there. And this is back when retro gaming was just starting to get started, so everything was really cheap. So for like, I remember the first trip for like $50, I got an NES and like 12 games and a Sega Saturn and, you know, a couple of games, and we just went hog wild. This is how I knew that we were their favorite customers. We were there one time. So for some context, they had a wish list program. You tell them what games you were looking for, and if it came in, you know, they would set it aside. They'd call you and say, hey, you know, we have this game here. Can you come pick it up? My wish list was so large, they eventually just stopped looking at it. They would just call me whenever they got stuff traded in. They're like, hey, this is what we got this week. Is there anything in here that you'd be interested in? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. I'll take this, that, and the other thing. And then another time we were up there, and my buddy Chip found something that he really wanted, but he didn't have the scratch for it at the moment. So he asked one of the guys working the desk, you know, hey, could you set this aside for me? How long could you hold it for? And the guy was like, 3 days. And the owner, who was, you know, just a few feet away, was like, no, we hold it. And the guy was like, well, you told me we only hold it for 3 days. It's like, no, for these two, we hold it, because they knew that we were going to come back and buy like $100 of other stuff while we were there. It eventually wound up going out of business, and I just remember being just so sad by that. Like, it felt like a loved one had died. I've yet to find a store that had the level of deals that Play and Trade only had. Now, Play and Trade as a company is still around, but they're basically GameStop light now. They're not nearly as awesome as they were back in the mid 2000s.
That sounds a lot like up here. We had independent stores that then became Microplay, which was owned by a video chain, and they're basically EB/GameStop Lite, and it's never been the same since like mid 2000s. Same deal.
Yeah. Now it's kind of leaping off that. This is a bit of a sidetrack. It's kind of interesting that we're seeing a bunch of independent game stores cropping up in the last few years. But that's kind of a bit of a sidetrack. But yeah, Play and Trade was one of my favorite stores. Another one that I really love, and that is still around today, is Starland down in Chantilly, Virginia. And they actually have an online store and will deliver to you. So they're
that's pretty good for like an independent store like that.
Oh, they're freaking huge. Like their showroom is actually operates out of a warehouse. Like they've got
so it sounds like they basically probably purchased up entire other stores' collections and then just operated like that. That's what happened here too.
They've got stuff. Well, the thing is, they don't. Although games are what they primarily trade in, they also deal with a bunch of like anime merch.
Okay.
And like I said, they have an online store that ships nationwide, so they're not just limited to you drive into their showroom. Although you certainly can do that, and that's how I go there. But they also have a customer base online. They'll ship anywhere in the continental US.
And the advantage, obviously, of going in person is there's the ability to work up prices and special deals that you can't do over the internet.
Not really with this place. They tend to be a little more expensive than a lot of places, but the trade-off with that is that that you're going to get something that works because they thoroughly test and clean everything before it goes out. Everything goes out onto the shelf, sealed in plastic so it doesn't collect dust or anything. Kind of wish they'd put price stickers on shit, but no, they don't do that. They instead put like this little barcode with a code number that you've got to go onto their website and search for. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, especially because they don't have Wi-Fi in there, but hey, whatever, Great place. I'm glad they're still there, and I love going there. So yeah, that was where a good chunk of my collecting was. It was in the late 2000s, and then I kind of fell out of it for a few years when I built my first gaming PC. Because at the time I wasn't working a great job, and had to pay for school. So I was like, okay, well, I can either buy a new console every 5 years, or I can just build myself a PC and maintain that. So that's what I did. And it wasn't until, say, like 2018, where I randomly was just trolling YouTube, and I discovered a guy named Metal Jesus Rocks, he's a big retro gaming YouTuber, and I discovered his game room tour, and that really got the bug biting me again. And that was actually when I started getting back real hardcore into game collecting, and not just getting real big into just buying games, but also learning how to do it smartly and how to actually plan out and budget and how to spot what's real and what's fake, and actually getting educated on how to collect smartly. And
with him, he has the advantage of people on like the edge of like the West Coast, Northwest, same with Northeast and Texas.
Here's the thing: he's in Seattle. You've got Microsoft and you've got Nintendo, both in Seattle, both of which have huge employee stores on their campuses.
Yeah,
like
so
Seattle. I've heard Seattle described as basically nerd mecca. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a gamer. So all
Vancouver's the same deal, like in BC. You have also where they're located is where a lot of the shipping, it's where a lot of the games came into the country from Japan. So
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that just stayed there. And the same goes for Toronto over here. Like that's why Toronto's always had a pretty big gaming scene. But if you're stuck, I feel bad for the people in the Midwest. Because unless you have somebody who kept all their games in a barn somewhere, there's a lot of games that never quite made it to full distribution. So he's at that advantage. If you look at a lot of the popular and large game collectors online, a lot of them are on the West Coast.
Well, the East Coast is no slouch either, because I'm from Baltimore, so I'm gonna have to put up my dukes here for my East Coast brothers and sisters. But we're no slouch either. We actually have I believe it's the largest independent games retailer on the East, if not in the country, at the very least on the East Coast, Digital Press up in Clifton, New Jersey. His shop has been on the news several times, and he actually holds a swap meet every month in his store on the last Saturday of every month, the North American Video Game Aficionados meet. Those of you who are real big into your internet culture may remember when the Angry Video Game Nerd and my mouth bleeds to speak his name, the Nostalgia Critic, had one of their showdowns there way back when the internet was young and the before times of plenty that we squandered.
So cool guy and moron.
Yeah.
But you can actually, I was thinking when we were talking about all this with the whole game collecting exploding, it's a double-edged sword. You gotta love, the AVGN, but you kind of hate him too, because it's almost like he's the catalyst for game prices going up. You can
Not
trace
well,
it.
not really. You do see, because this is a complaint that I see a lot, that gaming YouTubers have been driving up prices. And while there is an element of truth to that, because especially people like Metal Jesus who do hidden gems videos, they're talking about games that people might not have heard of and that weren't in demand before. So yeah, that's going to get people interested in trying those games. And of course, because these stores had to make a profit in this economy, that's going to drive prices up a little bit. And everyone talks about how, like, this is gonna be the death of game collecting. The bubble's gonna burst. But here's the thing, okay? Wind the clock back 10 years. I can't speak for Canada, but down in the U.S. 10 years ago, GameStop was literally the only game in town if you wanted to buy games. Okay, you had Starland and maybe a couple of other online retailers, and you had eBay, but that was basically it. There weren't a whole lot of independent game retailers. You couldn't go to a brick and mortar store because they just weren't there. They couldn't compete in this market.
Oh,
but
yeah,
now
it is very different. We had a lot more.
Yeah. But now, in the last few years, I mean, I have seen independent game retailers basically explode. Up in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Lancaster area alone, there's a dozen independent game stores that I will go up to, and I'll just make a circuit. Mike likes to, Mike wonders how I can spend $1,800 on a single game shopping trip. That's why, because I'm hitting like 9 or 10 stores in one day. And I'm seeing more and more of these stores crop up every day. Hopefully they'll stick around. I don't know, with this whole lockdown and COVID-19 thing, that remains to be seen. But I'm seeing all these stores coming up. They're run by people who are passionate about the hobby, and they're making good business because, we're in that 20-year cycle. We're seeing people who grew up with, like, the N64 or the GameCube and the PlayStation 2 coming in to buy the games that they played when they were kids and to share with their children who are coming up. And I'm seeing all these new people getting into the hobby. And, that to me doesn't sound like a hobby that's dying. That's one that's thriving.
The economy of it is thriving. It's just the prices have started to, people are not willing to let things go for bottom barrel anymore. Like here, I was just doing some math in my head. We had about 15 to 20 independent stores from the late 90s until 2010-ish. Not including all EB Games is GameStop in Canada. We have the same amount of those that we always had. So we had about 4 or 5 in the area. Now we're down to, I think, 3, maybe 4 independent stores, and they've basically purchased all the other stores that died. So like the one store has a warehouse above them the size of an entire like strip mall, just with, like, there's like 500 PlayStation 1s in there. Like they just basically bought up everybody else. So we've seen our market shrink.
Well, like I said, I'm just speaking for the U.S., but, like, I hear people talk about, 10 years ago I could walk into a store and buy Super Mario Brothers for like $1, and now it's like $10. And I was like, yeah, but that store was the only place in town that you could go to. The selection was really tiny.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
They weren't maintained very well. And there was basically that copy of Super Mario Bros. Was probably the only thing that you could buy. Now you can go to, like I said, Lancaster and Philadelphia. There's like, a dozen stores that I go to. It's we're seeing actual, like, growth and in this hobby, and that's just the nature of the beast. That as more people come in, prices are going to go up, but eventually you're going to reach a point where things kind of level off. And you're probably never going to see the days where Mario Brothers is $1, but you're never going to see it get to a point where it's going to be to the point where everyone's priced out of the hobby, because the hobby, the economy just can't sustain itself that way.
I think it's changed though. Like the idea of the micro consoles become big, or you get companies like Data East and Jellico that are licensing out copies for every platform, or multi consoles, or mini consoles, or new cartridges. So if you're somebody like myself, or somebody who wants to just play the games, there's a lot more options now that way. And it's sort of left the collecting market to people that are hardcore collectors. Whereas before, if you wanted to play Nintendo, you kind of had to just buy a Nintendo.
There is some truth to that, and that is something that has been affecting the collecting market. And I think that actually you might actually start seeing some prices going down because of that, because there are options. I mean, look, back in 2005, a copy of Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 1 ran about $150. Nowadays, if you ask for that price for a copy of FF7, they're going to laugh in your face because there's 100 other ways that they can get a hold of it.
Unless it's a black label and it's sealed.
Not even that. I got a black label. I got a black label Final Fantasy VII that costed like $20.
Okay,
it's
I would say there's still a few titles that are sort of always going to retain some value. Like Earthbound didn't really go down that much, did it? When the eShop copy came out.
No, it didn't. I've actually got a kind of a funny Earthbound story, kind of leaping back on how you had your games keep coming back to you. So Earthbound is one of those games that if I see a copy in the wild, I'll snatch it up because I'll basically use it for trade bait. I'll trade it to somebody for something that I'm really looking for. So I found a copy at this shop up in Eldersburg, and I snatched it up, and I wound up needing some extra money. So I turned around and I sold it for like $20 more than I paid for it. I think I paid like $100 for it, and I sold it for $120. A couple weeks later, I go up to that store again, and there's a copy of Earthbound, and it's going for $120. And I'm like, all right, I didn't think anything of it, so I just went and I bought it. A little bit later, needed money again, sold it again. I got a profit. I think I sold it for like $150 this time around. Okay, a couple weeks later, back at that store, there's a copy of Earthbound, $150 this time. Well, now I'm starting to get kind of curious. So I bought the copy of Earthbound, and this is the only time I've ever done anything to mutilate a game cartridge, and I hate myself for doing it. But I cut a little notch in the cartridge, and I sold it on eBay again, and I sold it this time for $180. Went back to the store a couple weeks later. There's a copy of Earthbound, $180. I said, "Can I get a look at that cartridge?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." So he pulls his cartridge out, hands me. I flip it over. Sure enough, there's the notch that I cut in the cartridge.
You know what? I think I know.
Had basically been passed back and forth between me and this store.
You know what
I didn't say anything.
They were using it as a loss leader to get people in. Seriously, there's a local store that'll do that here. They'll give you what they're going to sell it for, so they can take pictures to put on Facebook and say, "Look what we've got." And then the idea is, you come into the store, even if you don't buy that game. And they're just going to hook you on other stuff. It's like, oh my God, this store has Earthbound and they got Panzer Dragoon Saga and that. It's like, sure, they'll sell it, but that's worth it for advertising for them. So that's probably why you were able to pass it back and forth, and they kept paying whatever you were asking for it online.
I don't even think they knew it was me, but I just thought it was funny as hell. So, but yeah, that's nothing. Like with the advent of social media, you're seeing all these stores building up communities around themselves. And that's something that I just love seeing, because I love, talking with people about like, oh, well, how did you get into collecting? What do you collect? How are you passionate about this? And it's just so great. I mean, you get the occasional fuckwit who's just in it for the money. I call them the prospectors.
And they think they're going to make their retirement off of it. Yeah,
they're coming. I was like, oh, I'm going to buy, this collection of 1,000 NES games, and that's what I'm going to retire off of. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, buddy.
Yeah, if money, here's the thing too. If money was no option, if I Birdman and I are on disability, so it's not a matter of we have a ton of disposable income as well, or disposable income. If money was no issue, let's say I won the lottery, you better damn believe I'd have a big game collection, because then it would be for the aesthetics, for the appeal of just having it almost as like decor.
See, I don't think I would, honestly. I mean,
you don't think so anymore?
No, I really don't. I mean, honestly, game collection has kind of soured me.
You'd probably collect more figures than anything, eh?
Honestly, I don't even know. I mean, I might go after a few high-end statues, but that would really be it. I mean, I look at game collecting, I look at the prices people are paying, and honestly, stuff just doesn't mean a lot to me anymore. Like, when I look at people paying the ridiculous amounts for something that's going to sit on a shelf, I'm like, man, that's rent. That's everything else. I can't think about
when you're on a budget.
Anymore.
You think about for me, I am much more inclined, and I don't have the money to do it, but I'm much more inclined to buy the better hardware. Like, for instance, I would rather get I've got a 50-inch 4K TV, entry level HDR. If I had the money, rather than getting a few really expensive games, like I could buy 5 rare games for $2,000. I would rather spend that $2,000 on a 75-inch high-end TV to play the games on, or get a really good surround sound system to play the games on. Because to me, I'm thinking, what am I going to get the most use out of? It'll be what I'm playing on. Or so, like, if I was going to collect or wanted to play games, in the best format ever, I would probably go and not buy or modify an original Nintendo or Super Nintendo. I'd probably buy those analog systems. That company that puts out the super high-end FPGA consoles. I think it was like the Super NT and something else. That I would get something like that, because then I could, either put a multi-card in there, or if I wanted to get the original games, I'd do that. I would go for, like, what is the best value? Hardware is always the best thing and the hardest thing to get. So I might go after some prestige items. Like, I might finally get myself a TurboGrafx CD or a Jaguar CD, not because they're any good, but because it's like the holy grail of things I've always wanted. And I was just thinking, I have one game. Everything else I have physical is just consoles now, and like, I've got all the modern consoles, and I think I have, like, Trials of Mana right now because I couldn't get a review copy, so I bought it. But, like, I have one singular game in my collection still that's physical. I have Legend of the Ghost Lion for the NES, because as a kid I saw it in Nintendo Power or one of these magazines, and I was like, oh, it's like Dragon Warrior Final Fantasy. And I spent 20 years trying to find a copy in the wild. And it's just simple Dragon Quest style RPG. But I couldn't find it anywhere, and I was not willing to buy it online because I was like, I'm going to find it. I told myself as a kid, I'm going to find this in a store. And in my late 20s, I went to the local game store, and I was like, how much is this? Because I saw it on the shelf in the pile of garbage. And he's like, I'll give it to you for $3. And I was like,
Jesus.
Yes. I think it's like, I don't know how much it costs, maybe $15-$20. I don't know. He might have tried to normally charge more, but he had no idea. He's like, it's in that pile. I'm like, yeah. He goes, $3. So that one is still on my shelf because I'm not selling it.
I thought of one thing that might be my holy grail, and it's weird. I guess if I wanted to collect something weird, I like games that come with cool items. And one thing I'd love to get, but in my current living room, I've got nowhere to put it. It's just not going to happen. The Titanfall 1 Collector's Edition was pretty cool. But maybe Titanfall 2, because it came with a wearable helmet. And so did Doom Eternal. Those
you have a thing for helmets, I noticed. Like, you have a Power Rangers helmet. So yeah, like, you have small collection, but you're very particular now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my big thing is props. I mean, if money was no object, I would go for props. Like, if I could get a replica of the Master Chief's assault rifle from Halo 1, yes. If I could get Commander Shepard's like one of the guns. I mean, one of the coolest things I've ever had in my collection, one of it got stolen, one of it was replaced. I went to Com Bravo one year, and a guy, I can't remember I think it was called Quantum Props. He was on Facebook, and his stuff is fantastic. He's the guy who made the rideable Sparrow from Destiny, but he made me an N7 Hurricane, which is the SMG from Mass Effect 3, which has the super high fire rate. He made me one with a working trigger, and it lit up. And he made me 2 of them. One got stolen, one he made me as a replacement. And I sold them both. I would get those back.
Couldn't have sold both if one was stolen.
Well, no, I got a replacement.
Oh, so he made you 2 initially. One got stolen, and he made you a third.
Yeah. No, sorry. There were 2 made. One got stolen. One got sold. But yeah, one of them got nicked at Com Bravo, and then I had another one made. I also have a Predator pistol, like not the Predator as in the monster, but from Mass Effect. One of the weirdest items I just sold this recently is I went to Terminal Reality, and Terminal Reality was a developer that did the Ghostbusters video game. The same people, they were the original developers for the PS3 and the Xbox 360 copy. I got a Game Informer magazine that was signed by the entire development team. Now, it may have had Murray's signature on it, Ramis's, Ernie Hudson's, and Harold Ramis's signature on it. I'm pretty sure I said all 4. No, did I say Dan Aykroyd? Either
No,
way,
you said,
no,
you
sorry.
said Ramis twice.
Twice. Sorry, he's my favorite.
If
But
he signed it twice, would it be worth twice as much now that he's gone?
Probably. But I just sold it recently, and I sold a bunch of other things. I wouldn't mind getting that back, but again, I have nowhere to display it, and that's the big thing with like video game collecting. As I get older, I'm realizing the impermanence of certain things, and I realize it's not as fulfilling. I actually just had this conversation today. I was saying with Blair, in my current situation with how I sit in my wheelchair, even if I could get my arcade cabinets back, I don't think I would. As much as I miss my Marvel vs. Capcom cabinet that had 18 other Capcom games on it, like Street Fighter Alpha 3 and everything, I don't think I would do it again.
If it's a height issue, an angle issue, the only thing I could think of is you could maybe get away with getting one of those replica ones, from, like, was it Arcade 1-Up makes the 3/4 replica?
Yeah, I mean, there are possible solutions, but I don't know, just the older I get, the more I recognize, and I always think back to that conversation you and I had, Alex, is, do you really need all this stuff?
It was, yeah. If you can't even use it, what was the point of having it?
Well, yeah, and when I sold off my game collection to purchase my wheelchair, that's when it really hit me. I'm like, I need a wheelchair to live. I do not need a collector's edition of a game. And it just became so non-important to me now. But like I did say,
you still collect digitally. You have a digital collection.
Yeah, I've got a digital collection, but a lot of that is given.
I was going to say, I could see you shelling out the money for a really good, whenever like the PS5 comes out, a really good arcade board to use for their games. I could see you doing that because you could adjust it and sit wherever you need to sit with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what I want. I mean, as we're on the horizon for the Xbox Series X and the PS5, I'm wondering, should I maybe, if I want, do I want to get one of those cool edition consoles at some point? And even then, at my current setup, I only ever see the front of the console. So even then, I'm kind of debating it.
It would have to be something like my brother has the Spider-Man PS4.
Spider-Man.
Because then you got a whole different color. So like if they put out like a translucent one or something interesting, maybe that would be worth it for you.
Yeah, like there was one I wanted and I lobbied for it hard, but Microsoft didn't give it to me. I wanted the Titanfall one. I even considered buying the Titanfall controller, but it wasn't a pro controller. Now that's something I will go out of my way to buy, is a pro level controller. I went out and bought the Xbox Elite controller in 2016, and it's been the best decision I've ever made because I put this thing through its paces because I play Call of Duty competitively. I put many hours into Titanfall 1 and 2. I play every shooter you can imagine, and my reflexes are sharper with it. I'm a better competitor because I have better hardware.
I debated putting money into the second revision of that controller because it's the first one to have a built-in battery, and it uses USB-C, so I could use my like Switch charging cables for it. That would be something, I don't know, actually, because we've been talking about different collecting stuff. Like there's periphery things. Like I had almost a complete collection of like the Nintendo Power line and like a few other magazines and, a whole bunch of different controllers and that. Dr. Gonzo, like, do you just collect the games, or are you the guy that has to go get the like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 controller and that sort of stuff?
I'm kind of a little all over the place. Games and consoles are the main thing that I collect. There are some ancillary stuff that I do collect, but I'm not like, I gotta have it hardcore about it. Like one of the ones that ancillary collection I have is video game art books, because I love learning about game design and how they're made. And like half of my art book library was actually purchased from Mike. So that's something that I collect. I also, because I'm real big into Smash Brothers, especially with Ultimate, I've been collecting the Smash Brothers amiibo, and I also collect, any other. I also like to buy any other amiibo that look particularly cool and that I'd like to have just on display. The only amiibo that I have that are really valuable are my Squid Sisters ones, which a buddy of mine hates my guts for because he doesn't want to have to spend $150 for the set. And I found them at a yard sale for $1 for the pair.
Oh, wow. My brother, he's not a huge game collector, but he has every amiibo. Like, all of them. Even, like, he went to the States to get the Mario cereal so he could get it because it wasn't available here. And for him,
I do have...
I'm sorry, I was just thinking. I got him for Christmas one year, and I couldn't believe what I spent on it. It was like $100. I got him the Toys R Us Canada Wii exclusive Skylander amiibo hybrid. Was it Dark Bowser or Dark Donkey Kong?
Dark Bowser.
One of them was exclusive to Toys R Us on the Wii. And I was able to get that for him, and that because of that.
Are you talking about dry Bowser, where he's like a skeleton?
No, it's regular Bowser.
But he's just painted red and yellow or something.
No, he's painted. He's painted black and like crystal.
I'm not gonna look that up. I've never heard of that.
I thought of something that you guys have probably never heard of, but keep going.
But
so basically, with those Skylander ones, there was a switch on the bottom, and it would switch from being a Skylander toy to being an amiibo.
Oh, now I know what you're talking about. Okay, yeah, all right. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay,
so he has all of them, including that, and I had never seen him so happy with I was like, oh my god, for this little thing, because he had like every single other one, and he didn't know if it was available in Canada. Surprise, it wasn't. I had to get it from Toys R Us in the States.
Yeah. Let's see. I do have a few special controllers, mostly for the Nintendo Switch. I've got 2 of the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 controller. I've got 2 of the Splatoon 2 one. I've also got the Smash Bros. Ultimate edition that came with the special edition Smash Ultimate that also came with the Steelbook case. That's another thing that I'm really hardcore on is Steelbook game cases. That's why I went so hard looking for the European editions of Pokemon and Link's Awakening, and now Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which I managed to get. The UK copy comes not only with the steelbook, but a vinyl record of the soundtrack. Now I just need a record player.
See, I have the record.
I was so goddamn happy.
I was looking at that, and I went, like, I still have my fingers crossed. There's a possibility Nintendo might be sending me a copy for review, but I saw the vinyl and I was like, oh. Because I actually have a decent vinyl collection, and I was like, "But I want." And I saw that you collect, like you have. I don't know if you collect all the statues, but you do have stuff from Xenoblade, right?
Yeah, well, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is my favorite RPG on the Switch. I absolutely fell in love with that world and its characters. So I've got kind of the top shelf of my Switch bookshelf is basically a mini shrine to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I've got the regular and special editions of the game. I've got the Good Smile Pyra statue, and I got the Mithra coming on December, which they put out on a limited re-release pre-order. Thank God, because I'm not going to spend $600 for a fucking figure.
Thank you. At least you have your limits.
Yeah, there are some things. Yeah, now as far as other oddities, when it comes to you mentioned we were talking before we were recording about your pal Brody and how he collects oddities. Now, as far as oddities, the only stuff that I really collect is I will collect weird hardware. So some of the weird pieces of hardware that have actually the current crown jewel of my collection, and I don't know if you guys have a YouTube feed of this. If you'd like, I can send you pictures. To put up on the YouTube feed, but the crown jewel of my collection right now is a Nintendo Wii developers kit that I paid $950 for, and it came with all of the software and hookups. So if I had a machine with Windows XP and I knew what I was doing, I could actually make my own Nintendo Wii games. I think GameCube games as well. I'm not sure. I'm trying to
not common at all. Like my brother got a Wii and Wii U developers license, and what you do for the most smaller companies, they sent you a developer's kit software based with an emulator to get.
I've got the hardware.
I was going to say,
I've got that.
To get that, you could only get that if you were a physical publisher.
Yeah, no, I got the box, and I got a lead on a PlayStation 3 developer's kit that I'm pursuing. And then I've also got a JVC XI, which was in the 90s Sega entered into a license with JVC to produce a console that was a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD in one unit.
Did you buy it off me, maybe?
No, I found it at the same. I actually found it at the same place that I found the dev kit. Bought it the same day. because one of the problems that you have when you want to have all your consoles hooked up is fucking outlet space. And anyone who collects for the Genesis will tell you the Genesis and the Sega CD and the 32X, they all had their own plugs and they're all that big fuck off brick.
Yep.
So if I could get for me, getting the XI was less a case of I need hardware. It's just a matter of practicality. It's like, hey, that's one less outlet that I have to use. That I
can tell you about it. When I bought it, I got it on eBay. I paid, I'll say it, I think it was like $80 US, even though it was in Canada. I got it from a guy in Quebec, and it came with a few games. I got it for the same reason you did, but I didn't realize it's actually a better working Sega CD.
Oh yeah, the sound sound quality blows the official hardware out of the water.
Yeah,
and that's because that's what JVC did best. They were a stereo manufacturer in the United States.
And it also had S-Video out built in.
Mm-hmm.
The other big thing with it, though, was the firmware. It used a newer version of the Sega CD firmware for more reliability. And there was a newer version than that came on that was at the CDX, that little small one that they put out, that Sega put out, or the Panasonic or somebody.
Yeah, but no, the CDX was an official Sega product.
Okay, that one was unreliable.
Fun fact, you could actually use that as a Walkman.
yeah, but the problem with that one was it apparently had a finicky laser that needs to be fixed. The JVC XI is, for the longest time, was sort of the unsung hero of the Sega CD. I love that thing. I mean, and I mean, you couldn't play, you'd have cartridges plugged in. You couldn't do a 32X with it.
Yeah, you can. I've done it.
You did it? See, mine, when I tried to do it, they said it was physically locked out. Wouldn't work that way.
Nope. You have to get the one with the special brace.
Okay.
Yeah. Which because the thing is they put out two versions of the 32X in the US. I don't know if they did it in Canada. In the US, they put out.
We would have probably had both, unless one was like a very late cycle.
Well, the 32X itself was the same between the two packages. The difference was one was designed specifically. One was packaged to be purchased for people who had, I think, it was the Model 1 Genesis that required a special brace to put into the console along with the 32X. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And then I also let's see. So I got the Wii Dev kit. I've got the JVC XI, and then I also have this is something that my friend Tom sold me. The PlayStation 2 Slim console. There was actually a version that was put out. It was a special release. It was a silver version. I don't remember exactly what the model number was off the top of my head. I have to pull it off the shelf and take a look at it. But it was the only version of the PlayStation 2 released that had an internal power supply and didn't require an external brick.
Oh, that's neat. I didn't know that.
I think I had that silver one actually.
Well, it wasn't all silver ones. It was just this one particular model number.
It must have been like the last revision or something.
Oh yeah.
I remember Walmart was blowing them out for like $79, and I remember seeing the silver one, so that might have been it. But as far as oddities, have you picked up one of the Canadian mini Wiis?
No, I have not. I didn't even know those existed, so that you may have to hit me up offline.
It was only sold in Canada. Has no online support, no GameCube. It is a smaller.
Isn't that weird ass one with the red casing?
Yes.
We got that down here. It was just a Model 3 Wii.
Well, no, it was
the one that's black with the red trim.
Yes, that was Canadian only initially.
Yeah, no, we eventually got those down here. Those are
because they released them up here. It sold incredibly poorly.
Yeah, no, they're more common than dog shit down here.
Okay, because they were non-moddable. Because the big deal for the longest time was you couldn't import them to the States. You couldn't buy them down there, and that it was sort of a weird oddity that a lot of people didn't even know existed. And it came out as was it the same year as the Wii U? It was just sort of like, it was like their cheaper alternative.
We got it down here like a year after the Wii U, I think. I don't know. I have to go back and check.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was released at the same time here, which I found was funny. I'm like, oh great. Oh, they didn't have support for the shop. There was no Wi-Fi. You couldn't even plug anything in to make it work. It was basically
good for basically taking up to your cottage more.
It was an entry level console. It was something that for parents to buy their kids for Christmas
with no online capabilities. And the other deal was it was made to be non-hackable. Period.
But swinging back to the XI, Skyblaze, one of my staff members on Nerd with Her Power, she fucking hates my guts for having that because she's a huge Sega collector and she lives in England and they didn't get it, so like, she wants to.
Oh, she'd have to get it, and then she'd have to use NTSC to PAL converter, unless she has a television that works with both, and it would be a pain in the butt. And then she'd have to get a step down converter or a step up converter for the power. That's a pain in the butt.
Yeah. But as far as oddities, I'm more interested in weird and unusual hardware. My current holy grail that I swear to myself that if it was still there when I went back up there, one of my stores up in Lancaster, they have a and I feel confident telling the story because I don't think that someone's going to go snipe this off from under me. But one of my stores up in Lancaster, they have a Starlight Children's Foundation Nintendo 64 hospital cart, and this is one of these carts with a TV screen and a console chained into it that you'd wheel into a kid's room while they're waiting for surgery or while they're staying there because they've got some horrible disease. And they had one of these. They had one of these carts in one of my stores, and it was working. It had like I think Paper Mario 64, and a couple of games attached to it, and it still worked. And it was $1,500, and I was like, I can afford this. I could have this in my collection. All I need to do is work out the logistics to get this thing back home, and I can keep it in storage until I get a house where I can display it. But like, I've got to have this thing. And then the other holy grail that I'm really trying to track down is a Panasonic Q, which was only released in Japan, and it was a version of the GameCube that had all chrome siding, and it could play DVDs.
That's the DVD
One of my friends
karaoke
has
one,
that,
right?
actually.
Say again?
Wasn't that like the DVD karaoke machine one?
It could play DVDs. I don't recall off the top of my head if it also had karaoke.
I think it has a karaoke button on the front of it.
Yeah. But the problem with one of those things is that the disk drive just keeps borking out. So I want to get one that works.
My holy grail of oddity systems is the PlayStation, the one that's got the built-in TV tuner for the PS2, the one that was released only in Japan. It's like a big ass brick it's like a TiVo mixed with with a PS2, but it's only in Japan.
Now, as far as games, the holy grail for games right now, that may change if this deal that I'm negotiating with a friend Mike's is going to go through. But right now, the most expensive game in my collection is Rule of Rose for the PlayStation 2. And I told the story I nerded the third power. I'm going to tell it again just because it's a funny story. But wind the clock back to 2006. There's a store up in Glen Burnie called Power Gamer. That it was, one of the only non-GameStop stores there, and they sold, retro games, but they were also really great for, import titles and obscure games that, didn't get a whole big wide release. So if you wanted an Atlas game before the Sega buyout, this is the place to go. And Rule of Rose, coincidentally, is an Atlas game, because before the buyout, Atlas was strictly small print runs. Like, they would do one print run, and then that was it.
Yeah, like with the exception of, I think, Disgaea is the only thing that ever had 2 runs.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. And just Disgaea wasn't Atlas. Disgaea was NIS.
Was it? I thought the first one was Atlas.
No.
Oh well,
I don't know. I have to look, but anyway.
Regardless,
but they got a stack like 30 high of Rule of Rose for the PlayStation 2, and they could not give this thing away. No one was buying it, and at the time, I was on a horror game kick, and so I eventually I bought it when they kind of knocked it down to like $20. And a buddy of mine who was also, into game collecting, Chip, same friend of mine, I kept saying to him, hey, you going to pick this up? It's probably going to be hard to find down the line. And he's like, oh, no, I'll just pick it up later. I don't see it getting to be really expensive. That was back in 2006. The cheapest copy that he has been able to find since then in the wild is a loose disc for $200. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with my complete in-box copy that I spent $20 for, and according to GameEye, that is currently running for $380. So I made a pretty hefty profit on that one.
One of the weirdest games I had, and I got it for free, is I had a complete in-box Action 52. And it was gifted to me.
Oh wow!
Which one?
And then I broke it.
The like original Nintendo one, or are we talking the the Super?
Yes, the original.
Okay,
the original Nintendo one, the clear one. I had that gifted to me by Greg Pavich of Cheetah Man 2 fame or infamy, depending on how you want to look at it. I asked him, like, do you have any copies of Action 52? He's like, yeah, sure. I'm like, can I have one? Yeah, sure. So he gave me that and a copy of Cheetah Men 2. Now, I dropped my copy of Action 52 on the floor one day. The cartridge broke in half. Like the shell shattered.
I just gotta ask, was this for the NES or the Genesis?
NES.
Okay, yeah, I'm assuming did you just have the cartridge or did you have it complete in box?
Complete in box. I literally just said that.
You're gonna hate life. That's worth $365 now.
That's okay. I made $500 off of it, and it was broken.
So there you go.
So I was like, "Oh, that worked out nicely. Thanks. You just paid rent this month."
I had a friend who spent a stupid amount of money getting what was that spin-off of Mega Man, Misadventures of Tron-Von on the
oh god,
and then I love it. He bought it. A week later, it shows up on the PlayStation Network, and the value plummeted.
Oh.
Well, no, it's climbed back up. That game is still pretty expensive.
But like his initial sale, he's like, "Look how much it's worth." I'm like, "It's worth nothing now."
Yeah, no, it's climbed back up. Now, one that did drop and then never recovered, and that a friend of mine is really pissed off at is Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne on the PlayStation 2. For a while, that game was like $80, and then it got a reprint, and now it's all over the place.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they start pumping out remakes of that, because I mean, SMP 5 is eventually...
Sorry, the connection keeps cutting out. I keep kind of thinking.
I think we're good. I think we're good now.
Yeah, but swinging back to oddities. Now I will occasionally pick up stuff that I know is going to be a bastard defined later, and that I know is going to be something that I can turn around and resell at a hefty profit years and years down the line. And that's the stuff that you really that I know it's basically junk items, stuff that you know people are going to throw away. And the big one right now is the Nintendo Labo, because it's just cardboard. It's going to wind up being destroyed. Parents are going to throw it away when the kids get bored with it, and it's basically just a paper good. But 15, 20 years down the line, that's going to be a real high ticket item for collectors looking for completion and stuff. So what I like to call the wild ass nonsense sometimes can be more valuable and worth more to collect than the games themselves.
I can totally see that. Another one would be Starlink, but only the Switch version if you get it complete in box, because there's going to be Star Fox collectors that want it.
Oh yeah. There's a YouTuber I follow named Arlo. He did a video back in like around Christmas time where he went to Best Buy when they were selling for like $5 a piece and bought like 30 copies of Starlink. And I showed that to a friend of mine who's like, "Oh man, that's pretty much the stupidest thing in the world." And Arlo himself even was like, "This is probably the most irresponsible financial decision I've ever made." And I was like, "Yeah, no, you wait in about 10 years, you're going to be able to buy a car with what you're going to be able to sell that for."
Yeah, like the Xbox and PlayStation versions are not going to be worth anything. But
I just sold mine for $10 because I had a spare in copy.
But to get the people are going to want it for the R-Wing more than anything by far.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And then another piece of wild ass nonsense that I'd really like to get my hands on is the Steel Battalion Xbox controller, which is basically like a recreation of a mech
monster.
Yeah.
That I mean, that's the kind of thing Mike would love, because it's basically like a battle mech or BattleTech mech with like all the different
pretty much
knobs. Didn't they only ever work with 2 games, maybe 3?
Nope, just one.
Just one, Steel Battalion.
Yep.
It was made specifically for that game.
No, that's right. There's been homebrew that utilized it, but that's it.
Yeah. Now, what amazes me about that is so many of those are actually come complete in box, which is
I've seen one in box in my life at that store that I mentioned, Entertainment Overload, and I think at the time they wanted $200 for it, but this would have been about 2008.
Yeah,
which, as far as I know, is a pretty good deal.
But I mean, as far as my collection goes, the games and the hardware are what I really focus on. I do like to collect special editions if I can get it, if they have some kind of extra that I'd really like to see. Again, Xenoblade Chronicles and my obsession with steelbooks. The rest of the stuff is really just, stuff for display, just to decorate my home with. I mean, my house is tiny. It's about the size of a 1-bedroom apartment. It's really more of a cabin than anything else. But I have the space above my door that it's just basically just a shelf built out of the wall. And for the longest time, it just sat there, just empty space. And I'm just like, there's really got to be something that I can do with this. So I actually started putting up some of my larger boxes, my my statues, the Master Chief helmet, some of my special editions up there. And I've got what I call my above door space of awesome things, which again, if you want, I can send you pictures of for the YouTube feed if you use it. And it's just this neat little conversation start. People come over and they'll see it. It's like, oh, I didn't know you had this, or oh, what's this? And it's just this really nice little piece of display in my house. But again, like I said, the games are really what I'm focused on. And I don't tend to seek out games that are ridiculously expensive just for their own sake. Usually, if I seek out expensive games, it's a game I actually want to play. Now, again, because my house is so small, I will tend to prioritize the more expensive games, just because it's a lot easier for me to find space for one $200 game than $10-$20 games.
I hear that for sure.
Yeah. So, but eventually, I am going to start branching out and seeking out the cheaper, inexpensive stuff. So it's really just kind of what am I in the mood to play, and that's what I collect. Like right now, the Switch has its claws in me really deep. It's actually the largest library at about a little over 100 games. When for context, the next largest is my NES at about 70, and most of the Switch games have actually been purchased in the last year because I'm sick in the head.
I've seen you post. We were out as friends, and you're like, here, I'm crazy. And I was like, what do you mean he's crazy? Oh, there's 12 new games.
Back in the day, the weird things that I used to collect, and this was my focus for many years, was controllers. And there were two types that I used to collect and go out of my way for. Fight sticks I used to go really out of my way for. And I was thankful that Mad Catz would always send me their Street Fighter sticks. So I had Mad Catz, Street Fighter 4.
The only thing they made that was worth the money was those fight sticks.
Actually, they made some really good audio hardware, but nobody talks about it. But yeah, I used to. I had the Street Fighter 4 sticks, Street Fighter 5 sticks, Street Fighter Cross Tekken. The only one I didn't have was the Tatsunoko versus Capcom one,
which would be worth bank now.
Yes.
You know what surprised me? There's a collector's market for it, but you wouldn't expect it. Specialty Xbox 360 controllers.
I'm not too surprised, actually, just because they had some really weird ones.
I mentioned Metal Jesus earlier. He did a video with one of his friends, Kinsey Burke. Yeah, 2 videos about her Xbox 360 controller collection. She's got some that are worth hundreds of dollars. It's insane.
One of my other things that I had that I used to love, because Mad Catz and other companies would send this to me because I was known as a rhythm gamer for a long time, is I used to play a lot of Guitar Hero and Rock Band. So I had a lot of really cool specialty guitars that were made from different companies. I had PS2, Xbox 360, PS3, all the way up to current. I have one Xbox One guitar left. Lord help me if that ever fails. Because I still play Rock Band to this very day. But the weirdest one I had there are 2 weird ones. I had one that was a dedicated bass guitar, which was really cool. It looked different. It had different frets on it. It had different spacing. It had a different body and different paint kit, which was really nice. It was based upon some model of Fender, which was really nice. And I had an officially licensed Gene Simmons The Demon axe, and it was literally like a battle axe that you could play. And it was for Guitar Hero. It was so cool. I also had an effects pedal that would, so on the Rock Band guitar specifically, they introduced the idea of the flanger and the echo and distortion and all that shit. This thing was designed, you would plug that into your guitar and you could use your foot like you would an actual stage musician, and you could actually use that to affect. It never worked properly for me, but I had that. I had different drum kits. One drum kit they sent me, but it got lost in the mail, was $1,000 drum kit.
You lost the mail, or did they just say they sent it and then didn't send it?
I don't know, because I did have tracking on it.
Did they lose it, or did they army lose it?
They probably army lost it, all things considered. But yeah, that was one of the cooler things that I never got a chance to own, but I did try it. It was a fantastic drum. Like, this was a studio quality drum kit. And it was cool. Like you could pound the crap out of it.
I imagine at that kind of cost, it would probably also have doubled as an actual electronic drum set if you plugged it into a music software.
It did. You just needed some kind of a specialty tool converter.
It probably needed like a MIDI input or something weird.
Yeah, something like that. One of the weirdest things that I just want to bring up is this is something I remember going on this quest during high school because I'm the oldest one here. My friend Ryan had his and I's schedules lined up weird. He lived a few towns over, but he picked me up one day from school, the middle of the day. He's like, Mike, we're going to Toys R Us. And the closest Toys R Us was 2.5 hours away. I'm like, why? Pokemon. Get your Game Boy. So, like, okay. And bring a link cable. Okay. So he takes me in the car and we drive around southern Ontario, hitting Barrie, Brampton, Newmarket, looking for a special download-only Mew.
For American, that's multiple hours of driving between towns.
Yeah, it was about 8-9 hours when all was said and done of us just driving around. But eventually we went to Newmarket, Ontario, to the last Toys R Us that we didn't want to go to St. Catharines or Niagara Falls. We're like, fine, fuck it, we're here. Let's hope for the best. If not, maybe we'll buy some Transformers or something. Lo and behold, we got Mew. At that time, who was the 151st Pokemon that you could only get from Toys R Us via download. And that was something incredibly
or if you're
special.
Use the Game Genie.
That the code wasn't out yet. It was still a significant amount of time before you could get it.
Oh, so you did it during that's right, the first run.
That's right. This is before Pokemon Yellow. This was Pokemon Red and Blue. So this would have been about 98. I think it was after the first movie, for sure. But yeah, that was a magical day in grade 11. And I had that cart until some stupid kid named Kwaku stole my Game Boy and that cart.
Are you sure that name? Is he from like Total Recall or some movie? It sounds like an alien name.
I think he was Jamaican. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But yeah, he stole my Game Boy and I never saw that card again. But that was probably one of the rarest things I've ever owned. But I guess it was just a download code.
Yeah, it was at the time. It was not that it was worth a ton of money. There wasn't really a market for it then, but it was a valuable item as far as rarity.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was going to say before we ramble on, we should probably get into like our final topic, which is, how has COVID changed the way you collect? Also, what do you see moving forward as far as collecting community? Because it's looking more and more like digital. As much as we wanted to argue not to move towards that as the main means of gaming, it seems to have become the de facto way for most people now.
Well, look what happened with Final Fantasy VII Remake. Look what happened with Persona 5. And
Final Fantasy Remake. I had a pre-order down on the deluxe edition. And then they told me it would be 3 weeks after release till I would get it. And I was like, well, canceled you and had to buy digital. It's the first time I'd ever had to buy digital. Because not that I couldn't physically wait 3 weeks. It's that it would have been spoiled for me within 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
To be totally honest, that sounds like a you problem. But I mean, you do what you got to do. I mean, I'm guessing you guys were doing a review on it, so you needed to get a hold of it.
Yeah, we had to get a hold of it and do it as fast as possible, so we could get either coverage for it or not have it spoiled for us with our other reviewer community people.
Yeah.
For me, the only thing the lockdown has affected me in that I can't go to any of my stores, and I'm scared to death that a bunch of them are going to close. But I'm still finding ways to add to my collection, mostly through online sales. Like I've been going real deep into the eBay game. And I'm also lucky in that most of my pre-orders for new games through Amazon haven't been canceled or delayed significantly. I'm just going to give it a moment so that Mike's motorcycling neighbor can get far enough with the microphone. So
I was going to say, I think Final Fantasy was the only game that was truly majorly affected by the logistics being screwed up.
But as far as digital versus physical goes, there's actually been a resurgence in the last year or so of companies actually producing limited runs of physical copies of games that were previously only released digitally. Limited Run is, of course, the big one, but you're also seeing specialty games, super rare games. There's another one, Game Fairy, that they just put out their first physical release, which was Bridge Constructor Portal, which I got.
I'm putting up stuff too, and there's a couple others.
Yeah.
Castlevania games, I think.
Yeah, they're starting to get into, because they previously just they just sold like hardware and stuff, enthusiast hardware. Now they're starting to get into putting out their own collector's editions. So I don't think physical is ever going to go away completely, or at least it's not going to go away soon. Just because there's people like me who they like to have, a physical copy of the game that they can hold and display and look at. And there's also the issue of preservation. I mean, look at how fucking excited everybody is about the possibility that the Scott Pilgrim game is going to be coming back. I mean, that was a game that was released only digitally, and for the longest time, you couldn't buy it anywhere because the license had expired, and so that game only existed on consoles that had it, or for a more recent example, the PT demo. I mean, how much are PlayStation 4s going for online that have the Silent Hills PT demo on it? Like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars.
Man, I should have sold my PlayStation a couple years ago. Because I still had that on my account, but then my PlayStation crashed.
And I think part of it, part of it is again, like I said, the collector's market, but also part of it is I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that game preservation is a real issue. And we're trying to find ways to kind of preserve the history of our medium. So I don't think you're going to ever see physical go away completely. It may eventually, worst case scenario, wind up being relegated to just that specialty market where people put out the small print runs of games. But I don't think I don't think you'll ever see it go away completely. But going back to the economic angle of it, that's the part that I really am worried about, because I mean, even at the best of times, I mean, a small business hangs by a thread. So for some of these stores, a lot of which are family run, and it's that family's sole source of income. Anyway, okay, so I'll just start my thought again. But now swinging back to the economic angle, that is something that does worry me, because a lot of these independent stores, I mean, they hang by a thread on even the best of days. So, I talk about how, like, in the Philadelphia, Lancaster, there's like a dozen stores. I would actually be really surprised if that number didn't go down by half by the end of this whole lockdown, just because it is so hard for any small business to stay afloat and competitive in this economy, and to lose what's now 3 months worth of income. I mean, that's a death sentence.
Some of ours have had moved to either curbside. They've leveraged their Facebook communities, where they were like, place an order down, and if we'll do curbside pickup if that was allowed. Other stores had done things like, hey, if you want to support us in the interim, they were selling things like gift cards, so that here's a promise to buy product later, but here's money, cash flow in, so they can still make their bills.
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't checked if any of my stores are doing that. I mean, some stores like East Starland that have online stores, I think they might be okay. They might have to scale back their operations to just being online for a while. But I really don't want to see these brick and mortar stores disappear. Because like I said, they've worked so hard to build this community around themselves, and I really don't want to see that go away, because one of the things that I have come to really love about this hobby is the people that you meet and the passion that they display for this hobby, and like and again, the community that just builds up around it. I've met so many of my friends now through this hobby, and it really kind of breaks my heart to think that we might be entering into a world where that avenue of branching out and socializing over this shared passion might go away, even if only temporarily.
Now, an interesting aspect of that is, while I think you're right, a lot of it is going to shrink as far as the general population. I think a lot of people are going to not care if it's through streaming or not, especially the younger generation. But there is obviously going to always be a collector's market, or maybe if it's like, if you buy the collector's edition, here's a physical copy of the game, here's a digital code as well. You might spend a premium, but you get the physical, you get the digital, whatever. But at the same time, we've seen a rise in arcades opening up again. So I'm wondering if, we're going to fill the void of the social thing with having, arcades, barcades, gaming cafes, whatever you want to call it, opening up again. And then people are more content to just stream their home games.
Well, as far as the arcades, that sounds like a discussion for another day, and one that I could also go on at length about. All my fellow Maryland peeps, let's pour one out for Tilt in Annapolis Mall.
And you know what? We'll probably have to do that again sometime. We should do one on arcades and the history of that and what it was like growing up. You're right. That's a whole different interesting topic.
Oh yeah, because I've spent a good chunk of my teenage years in an arcade. I used to hustle kids at my local one, so yeah, good times. So anyway, I guess that's going to be our prototype for today. So big thanks to Dr. Gonzo for joining us from Nerd to the Third Power. Once again, if you want to find out more information, Gonzo, where would they have to go?
Well, we're on YouTube. See, now you put me on the spot here. I don't have the channel name off the top of my head. We're on YouTube as Nerd of the Third Power. We also release MP3 downloads of each episode in addition to the YouTube feed. Like Mike mentioned, he also syndicates the show on This Week in Geek every week. Do you just do Nerd of the Third Power, or do you do Fools Who Ride as well?
Yes, we do both.
Okay. And of course, you can also find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Nerd of the Third Power Facebook. That's where we tend to post our new stuff first, as well as any upcoming news and announcements for stuff. And then we also have a feature in Nerd of the Third Power called Ask a Geek, where you can send questions to our team, and we'll read them off and answer them on the air. You can send those questions to drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com. And that's for it. We do have a website, nerdofthethirdpower.com, but it hasn't been updated in like 2 years because I am just like, I keep fucking forgetting to do it.
Good times. So anyway, Gonzo, maybe we'll bring you back next month if your schedule allows it, and we'll talk about arcades and our memories.
It sounds fun, yeah.
All right, cool then. All right, so for This Week in Geek, we have been
Alex, the producer.
And Dr. Gonzo.
All right, anyway, I've never
been on this side of the desk before.
You know what? See, now he heard it too. Mike never gives a cue as to who it's supposed to be because he's used to pointing at you in the studio.
That's true.
Did you point in the direction of where I would have been sitting, Mike?
Yeah, I really would have. Anyway, on that note, I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd, and as my friend Jackie Bam Bam might say, be cool, be kind, be careful. We'll catch you guys next time, right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at thisweekingeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at thisweekingeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
Lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.